Are they all 250?
We'll go ahead and call the Carlisle Council meeting to order on Tuesday, February 13th at 6:30 PM. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bignall. Here. Mr. Jewett.
Here.
Mr. McEldowney.
Here.
Mr. McIntosh.
Here.
Ms. Tankersley.
Here.
Mr. Humphries.
Here.
Mayor Winkler.
Mayor Winkler is out tonight with a family emergency. Is there a motion to excuse Mayor
So
Winkler?
moved.
Second.
Ms. Tankersley.
Yes.
Mr. Jewett.
Yes.
Mr. McEldowney.
Yes.
Mr. Humphries.
Yes.
Mr. Bignall.
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh.
Yes.
The regular meeting minutes from January 23rd are presented in front of you. May I have a motion to suspend the clerk's reading of the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Tankersley.
Yes.
Mr. Humphries.
Yes.
Mr. Bignall.
Yes.
Mr. McEldowney.
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh.
Yes.
Mr. Jewett.
Yes.
Are there any corrections to the minutes as presented? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Tankersley.
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh.
Yes.
Mr. Jewett.
Abstain.
Mr. McEldowney.
Yes.
Mr. Humphries.
Yes.
Mr. Bignall.
Yes.
We do have public forum tonight. We do have an oath of office for Justin Thurman as a police officer. Chief Bruck, if you'd like to say a few words, that'd be great.
Mr. Deputy Mayor and Council, thank you for having me tonight. I want to introduce Justin Thurman to you. He's our newest police officer. Justin's from Beaver Creek area. He's pretty new to law enforcement, but we're excited to have him here. He's been a reserve officer for us since the 1st of December, and he's done a really good job, and we've had a full-time opening, and Mrs. Duffy offered him that position. Justin's also a relative, a cousin of Katie Gee, our former officer, and while we don't hold that against him, we are excited to have her here tonight. So, Julie, I talked with Julie earlier today, and she said, "We're going to mention Westerville tonight." I hadn't really planned to. This is, the new career starting. But it does point out how dangerous and serious law enforcement is this today for all of us. And but it also shows these tragedies. I've been to too many of them. But it also shows in the tragedy how communities pull together and people, not just in the police community, but in the entire community come together. So even in something so tragic as that, something good comes out of it. So we're glad to have Justin here tonight. And I hope he does good, and he better be careful, because I insist on that. So, just move him up. I don't know if Mr. McEldowney's done this before.
I have not. Just my own.
This gonna be fun.
All right. Justin, if you'll raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support
that I will support
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the state of Ohio,
and the state of Ohio,
and will obey the laws
and will obey the laws
thereof,
thereof,
and that I will,
and that I will,
in all respects,
in all respects,
uphold and enforce the provisions
uphold and enforce the provisions
of the charter and ordinances
of the charter and ordinances
and resolutions of the municipality,
and resolutions of the municipality,
and will faithfully discharge
and will faithfully discharge
the duties of police officer
the duties of police officer
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. So do you want to get maybe a little away from the podium? I feel like there's no good way for me to duck.
Pop-up screen.
I'm sure Quinn has filters that.
We good? Thank you. Do you want to sign now, or
Yeah, have them go ahead and sign that.
you want to sign now? We will get the clerk in frame and back to you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to council? If so, state your name and address, please, for the record.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
My name is Claudia Tubbs. I live on Diane Drive in Carlisle. And I have a question regarding the first reading of the ordinance that you're going to do tonight for Sunset Estates. My question is why this is an emergency. My other question is why is the developer able to get by without making road and gutter improvements like every other developer? And will the residents of Carlisle be on the dime for something that should be covered by a developer?
I'll go ahead and address part of it. I'll go ahead and address the, what, can you repeat? Sorry, I'm sorry. The emergency?
Why do you feel that this needs to be an emergency and not have an opportunity for the community to respond to it?
As far as I know, this was brought to Planning Commission over the course of 5 meetings, I believe.
I think 4.
4 or 5. Those are open to the public as well. The developer has asked Ms. Duffy and council to be presented as an emergency. That's as far as the emergency. The, what was the second part? I'm sorry.
Second part is why is the developer able to get by without making road, gutter, sidewalk improvements like every other developer?
Okay. It did go through Plan Commission, as I mentioned. I do serve on Plan Commission. Mr. Bicknell also serves on Planning Commission. We had 6 members in attendance that evening. The motions were made to approve a variance for sidewalks. That did pass by a 5-to-1 vote. I will put on the record that I was the dissenting vote in that. They did make a recommendation to council to create a variance for the curbs and gutters. And that was also, that passed by a 4-to-2 vote. Again, I was one of the dissenting votes on that. And then they also made a motion to keep the streets at the current width, which is allowable in our code based on circumstances outside of our control. If I am stating that correctly, if I'm not, Ms. Duffy can jump in here. The motions were created due to the lack of connectivity. My vote at Plan Commission and my vote here tonight will reflect that there are situations in Carlisle where there are also no connectivity. Outside of Timber Ridge, there's no connectivity and there's curbs and gutters there.
Connectivity to the streets or to the...
Connecting sidewalks.
There's nowhere to connect to.
Okay,
Um,
but that, it has to start somewhere. I mean,
Right.
we've got sidewalks that end in a telephone pole.
right.
So that doesn't, to me, that doesn't, so what?
Right, yeah, and like I said, you know, I was a dissenting vote on all 3 issues at Planning Commission for those reasons.
I mean, we've got police officers that we can't pay. We've got people that own RVs that have spent 3 months trying to get, to be able to park their RVs in their house and you're passing something like this on emergency vote, I don't agree with it.
We haven't passed anything.
But you're considering it.
It's on the
And
agenda.
my opinion of council is, you're really quick to pass emergency readings, and I don't like them. I think there needs to be more transparency. I think something like this should be discussed. If you ever tried to drive down Sunset, when people are parked on the road, that road is far too heavy, or far too heavily traveled until it can get some more infrastructure in there.
Just for the record, this is the first discussion on this topic that council has had.
Okay?
It's up until this point, it's been a planning commission.
Okay, so why, I still don't understand why it's an emergency, why it has to be passed tonight.
I was not there. My understanding from the memo is the emergency language was at the request of the developer due to the contract, the expiration of a contract for the land purchase.
Okay, so the developer can come in and ask for that, and can we ask for that not to be an emergency?
It's at the request. We can vote no or yes. It's just because it's on here. We vote on the emergency. It's not automatically an emergency.
Okay, well, I guess I just want to go on record. What kind of houses are going to be in there? What are they? Are they smaller houses, big houses? What kind of tax base are you looking at getting?
My,
Do you want to address? Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Upscale homes, similar to what's in Eagle Ridge, and full brick homes, similar to the last home that was built down there, the Warrior Residence. That's what it's looking like. There's only 5 lots. They're 1 acre lots. As far as the parking concerned, the setback from the road is 150 feet, which you could park many cars on a 150-foot driveway. Plus, they're all going to be side entry garages. So driveways will be 200 feet, so there wouldn't be any need for anybody to park in the road.
Okay, so these are not going to be cheap houses. These are probably going to be $300,000 and $400,000
Yes,
houses.
yes,
Okay, so if you're building I'm assuming you're the builder?
yes.
Excuse me, if the builder is building a $300,000 home, can he not afford to put the proper gutters and sidewalks and things in, the improvement of the area that needs to be done?
Well, to address that, ma'am, we're running a lot of off-site sewer. The sewer's coming from almost 150 feet away. It's underneath the road. It has to be bored underneath the road, underneath the driveway. We offer to run 800 foot of water for 5 lots. When you divide up the cost of how much it costs to run 800 foot of water over 5 lots, it makes your lot costs extremely high. That's the reason I came in with the idea initially to put wells on them. I've offered the water line as a compromise, and the curb and gutter just throws the numbers off to where the lots are too high for what the market would bear in Carlisle.
Well, with all due respect, that's not my problem. Because you're building houses that clearly the average person can't afford, but at some point in time, Carlisle's going to have to put gutters and sidewalks in there. And you made your money left, and we're stuck with a dime. And so I just want to go on record,
the
I'm
alternative
against
is
this,
not-
I'm against an
excuse
emergency
me.
session.
The alternative is to not pass it, and the road won't get approved either way.
Well,
So, and then you can look into
if
it
you're
either
going to
way.
approve it, good for you. But I don't think Carlisle should approve it, so you can build your $200,000 and $300,000 houses on those lots.
Oh, that's your opinion.
Yeah, it is. So I'm asking council not to vote, not to approve this emergency session until we've had a chance to discuss it with the community and show transparency on this. Thank you.
thank you. I will also address just one other item because it was brought up at Planning Commission. The item of the return on tax base from this. As far as Planning Commission's role, and I feel here as council's role, it's our job to interpret the law as it's written and interpret the code as it's written without having those outside barriers such as what the return is going to be. That's the role of Planning Commission, and that was discussed that evening as well.
Can I ask you what the return will be on these houses for Carlisle?
At this point in time, I can't speculate.
You have an idea?
I can tell you that for every $1 of property tax, we get approximately 2 to 4 cents. Is that correct, Ms. Duffy?
Yeah,
Well, let me
probably.
help you a little bit here. My house values for about 150, and give or take, depends on what the county has.
Can you come up to the podium, please?
My house value is around 130, 140,000. Now that's market, tax value's less. But you get from me about $70 a year. 70 to 80 bucks a year off my taxes. So that's how much Carlisle will be getting off that size of house. So let's double it or triple it. So let's say that even if you get $200 a year, it's gonna take a long time to pay for the improvements that should be done on that road with this area going in. So you're not ahead. And again, you're sticking it to the people of Carlisle.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address council tonight?
You want to save RV discussion for the work? Tom Volpe, 315 Ethel Rob Circle. You want to save RV discussions for issues for the open discussion later, or you want them now?
Preferably, but if someone has something they'd like to talk about now, we absolutely.
Two things then, I'll reiterate. I think there ought to be a permit for any pad that's put in the backyard, whether it's gravel or blacktop or concrete, and for property values and making sure our area looks good, match the driveway, whatever driveway it is, put that as your pad. The second issue regards wells and pollutions. The photos that I've handed out before to the council, in my case, if the neighbor puts an RV in the backyard, it's 15 to 18 feet from my well. Now, our grandkids are going to live with us for a little while. And our neighbor, Tim Childers, HVAC, he said I can get my well tested. And I married Linda 10 years ago. We've never had it tested. I'm going to have it tested. So if it tests good, that's a good thing. If his RV leaks, coolant is poisonous, diesel or gas is poisonous, is it his liability or is it the city's liability because my well's screwed up because you're permitting? Curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else this evening? Seeing none, we'll close public forum. We'll move on to council reports, and we'll start with Mr. Humphries.
Thank you. First off, I did get a hold of Mrs. Sweezy. She does not live in the municipality of Carlisle.
I'm happy to see her go, I just
Correct.
cross T's and
I just wanted to
I's.
follow that up. Our Saturday retreat we had a couple Saturdays ago, one of the topics that came up was the ability to reach out to our community. One of the action plans was to more utilize our social media. On Facebook, there's actually Municipality of Carlisle, Ohio, and there now you can watch the videos of this council meeting. I also noticed that Friday evening, our agenda for Tuesday's meetings are usually published the Friday before, sometime around dinner time. And I also noticed that was on Facebook. So the availability of seeing, transparency, the idea of what we're doing and being available to, the mass medias, it's a lot easier. Most people are on social media more than they are going specifically to www.carlisleoh.org. So it's just one more thing that's an action plan that's come to fruition, and I appreciate that. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tankersley.
I have a couple things tonight. The first is I want to, again, welcome Justin, and we're very happy to have you. Be careful. And I would like to ask council to consider moving our meetings back to 7 p.m. We don't have to actually do that tonight, but I would like to put a motion out there that we either do that, consider it, and I ask that for work reasons.
Do you want to make that motion this evening?
So we might as well go ahead and discuss.
Yeah, I would like to make that motion.
Is there,
Yes.
so Ms.
I'd like to-
Tankersley?
I'd like
has
to
a
second
motion.
that, please.
What's the motion for? What time?
For 7, back to 7.
Okay. Motion on the table to move our council meetings to 7 p.m. Roll call, please.
Who seconded? Sorry,
Mr. Humphries. Yeah.
Mr. Bignall?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
The earlier meetings work better for me, but I will oblige everyone's request. Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mr. McElDownie?
Yes.
Mr. Humphries?
Yes.
Ms. Tankersley?
Yes.
So will that start with next meeting at 7?
So that will begin on February 27th. We will begin at 7 p.m.
Thank you.
Is that it?
So,
That's it.
Mr.
That's all I
McIntosh.
have.
A few things, expand on Mr. Humphrey's comments on the retreat. I would like to thank Mr. Sonny Lewis and Brent Centers from the city of Franklin for coming over and helping lead the discussion, keep us kind of focused and on task, so I appreciate them. We had some really good conversation. It was probably the best retreat we've had in my, that was my 5th one, I think. We walked away with some, a lot fewer but more defined goals than we have in the past. So I appreciate council's conversation and ideas on that. We touched on economic development, parks and rec, and community outreach. To tag on what Mr. Humphries was commenting on the community outreach, we did develop a social media plan of attack, more or less. We have more information going out on social media. We've tossed around some ideas for ways for the community to interact with council via Facebook Live or something in that realm. So people that can't make it to the meetings have a chance for some one-on-one, face-to-face meeting time. Parks and Rec, we decided to, which I do want to discuss this next meeting, the formation of a special event/recreation committee for council. Without having community involvement in the Parks and Rec department or some of the other departments that where they can function properly, council is going to have to take on the role of those boards. So we will be forming a special events and rec committee to, have some community events that we're lacking. The National Night Out, that Mr. Chief Bruck talked about, some bike helmet programs, just some special events in the community that, a lot of municipalities around here have that we don't because we don't have the manpower. So hopefully we can make those happen. We can get some action back in the parks in the summertime, springtime. And the other thing was economic development. And we really try to define what we are and what we aren't. What kind of businesses will work here, what we can attract. Kind of try to narrow our vision down on economic development. We decided to form almost a miniature chamber of commerce, so to speak, business coalition here in Carlisle to better interact with our businesses, get more one-on-one FaceTime with them, let them know we're here and see if they need anything from us or vice versa. See if they have any leads on new businesses, that kind of thing. So we will be forming that here in the upcoming months. Other than that, welcome to Officer Thurman. We appreciate you coming. Look forward to having you. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jewett.
First of all, I want to thank council for excusing me as I had the flu or something going around 2 weeks ago, and I don't think anyone wanted me here 2 weeks ago. Chief Bruck touched on it momentarily, but I do want to extend prayers and condolences to the officers in Westerville. It kind of hits home when we have an event like we have tonight, welcoming Mr. Thurman onto the police force. But all in all, our officers do a tremendous work, and I have utmost respect for you all, and keep them as well as you all in our thoughts and prayers. And I also want to publicly thank Sonny Lewis for coming and facilitating the meeting. Brad did a fine job explaining everything that was touched on, but thank him for that, and thank all of you for being here tonight. It makes council a whole lot more interesting, in my opinion, when we have the community input. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Mr. Bicknell.
Just to tag on everybody else's, welcome Officer Thurman to Carlisle. We appreciate your efforts and wish you best of luck, and hope you're around for a long time. Again, also like to thank all the public that comes out. We've probably the last 3 months have had a lot of community coming out to the meetings, and it does mean a lot to us because if we don't have a lot of community come in and voice good, bad, and different, or even come in just to listen. And, it gives us kind of more of an outline of, well, how we're doing okay, not doing okay, and just get your guys' opinion. So it does mean a lot to us that you guys come out. Also, I'd like to extend my condolences to the police officers as well. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to also ask for one more thing, please, and that would be to convene the Veterans Memorial. I know it's been kind of stagnant. I've got a couple ideas that I'd like to attempt to move forward with that group if possible.
We'll make note of that. I think that'd be great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As far as my council report goes this evening, Mr. McIntosh hit on a lot. I was going to touch on the retreat, so thank you for covering that. Thank you to Sonny Lewis for facilitating the discussion as well. As Mr. Jewett and Chief Bruck mentioned, our thoughts and prayers go out to the Westerville community and those officers' families. And thank you to Officer Thurman for joining the Carlisle Police Department. We value your time and effort in your position and wish you good luck moving forward.
Thank you.
And that is all I have for this evening. I don't believe, Mrs. Duffy, do you have anything to report from Mayor Winkler?
No, I do not.
Okay. We will move on to the manager's report.
Thank you. I'm touching on the tragedy in Westerville. Carlisle, the areas, I believe, and Chief Rush, please feel free to correct me, there is going to be a group of some local law enforcement officers that are going to go up on Friday for the services, and we will have an officer at this point who's planning on attending as well to represent the area as well as express this community's condolences on behalf of Carlisle. And just to kind of plan in the future, every year the Warren County, they always have a huge acronym and I forget what it stands for, but the well water testing event that is sponsored by Warren County is going to be May 1st this year. A few months ahead of time, if you want to mark your calendars, we'll put information on our website, Facebook, etc. It will be at the Carlisle High School on Tuesday, that's a Tuesday night, May 1st, from 4:30 to 6 p.m. So it is free. It is not a full-blown, extensive water test. They do offer those services, but it is to kind of get a quick look, is my understanding, of the initial water quality. So this area is very heavily private well, so they always enjoy coming out because they usually get a very good turnout. So mark your calendars. That's all I have this evening.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any committee reports this evening. There is no old business, no new business. Under resolutions, we do have resolution 2-18. This resolution is being presented to council for consideration as an emergency. Is there any discussion on the emergency language?
Just for the record to explain the request for the emergency. I know we talked about this a little earlier during the public session. This is on tonight for an emergency. The emergency comes out of conversation at the Planning Commission and the developer who, this has been a lengthy discussion at Planning Commission. The developer is under a time frame with the contract for his land sales, and he has requested that this resolution be presented tonight for emergency consideration, so that way he knows if this requirement will be in place to determine if he's going to proceed with the land contract, is my understanding. And if I've misspoke, Mr. Morris, please.
That's correct.
Okay, let me know. So that explains why it is on for an emergency.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to suspend the rule requiring 3 readings, have 1 reading by title only, and declaring an emergency?
I don't have a problem with the emergency, so moved.
Is there a second?
So,
Mr. Humphries?
No.
Ms. Tankersley?
Abstain.
Mr. Bicknell?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
yes.
Mr. McEldowney?
No.
Mr. McIntosh?
Yes.
If I may, I believe A vote of 5 is required for passage of emergency language. So it's my understanding that the emergency clause of this ordinance did not pass, so therefore it will be presented to you tonight as a first reading.
A resolution approving a variance to section 1230.05 curbs and gutters of the zoning code for the Sunset Estate development and declaring an emergency.
And just for the record, the emergency language on subsequent meetings will be removed from the title and consideration since that motion has failed.
Mr. Morris, is there anything else you would like to present about this subdivision before?
Yeah, I mean, I can go over.
If you'd like to come up to the podium.
It'll be first reading tonight, right? We're not
It is a
voting.
first reading. There is no, you're here to talk, just so the
Okay.
council's aware that you're not
Okay.
voting on anything tonight for passage of this. It's just discussion.
Yeah, so basically, when we put the contract together for the property, the thought was to do acreage lots, which we don't have here at Carlisle. Just 5 1-acre lots. The corner lot on the, would be, remain commercial. That would be almost a 2-acre lot, I believe. So that was the idea. The homes would sit back 150 foot off the road. We get a lot of people that have requested larger lots in Carlisle, so that's the idea behind it. Similar to the setting of the other homes that are on that side of the road. The Boyer residence, that property that was built about 20 years ago. Bigger parcels, pretty good sized houses, not so much a subdivision setting. So that was the idea, that was the thought, that's what we came here, or to Planning Commission with originally. Originally, we had support at Planning Commission in the first meeting, and then came to the second meeting, didn't have so much of support, and so back and forth 2 or 3 meetings, and then it was voted down. At the last meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, I proposed, originally I wasn't proposing to do the water, I proposed to do the water, and so that's what we've added to this piece is the 800 foot. And basically, when you only have 5 lots and you have that much infrastructure, you got a sewer line coming off-site underneath the road, you've got a water line that's 225 foot away from your first lot. It puts your price per lot so high that in this market, it can only be to a certain point. That's why we were talking about leaving off the curb and gutter and the road widening and sidewalks. So any other surrounding area that you go to, you see acre lots in Springboro, Stone Ridge, Country Brook, any of those, none of them have curb and gutter. And it's because you can't afford to give people that much property and put all that infrastructure in. So any other surrounding areas where you see out parcels, you don't see curb and gutter, you don't see sidewalk. So that's all I'm proposing. Originally I was proposing wells. I agreed to run the water line at my expense to do that. So that was my negotiation, and that's the best that I could do to make it happen. The ground's been for sale for 12 years. She talks about, well, make the developer pay for all this stuff. Well, if we don't develop it and it sits there another 12 years, nothing's getting improved either. So my proposal is to put 5 beautiful houses up there that are sitting back off the road. There's plenty of room for parking on those driveways, 150-foot driveways, there's going to be plenty of room for parking. So that's my proposal. I have people that are interested in building down there, but again, I can't have $75,000 in those lots and sell them in Carlisle and keep it in a 350 to 400 price points, which is where we expect to be. So that's what we're proposing to do. The emergency was only because the contract was until the end of the year. The people that are selling it obviously want to answer, and the planning commission process took a lot longer, so I got an extension for 30 days. They gave me another extension for 30 days till the end of this month, and so that's why I was hoping to get an answer on it, but I understand if we need more time to discuss it, I can probably get another extension. But
Question, please.
Yes.
Mr. Morris, do you happen to have any type of a diagram? I'm fully aware of the Sunset 123. Just for the availability of looking at, there's no doubt that what Mr. Boyer has is an attractive home. And to add 5 more of those would be, no doubt, a very nice situation, especially with that lot.
Right.
Just the availability of having an aerial a layout of what you perceive, where the 5 homes would be. Is
yeah, I've got the layouts. You have a package.
I've got it. I've got my planning commission.
I have,
We do have, I don't know if it's technically called a site plan or a concept
Yeah.
plan that was
the
presented.
lots are about 115 foot, 115 foot wide.
Thank
Yeah, and almost 400 foot deep. So the houses would set back 150 foot and be almost in the center of the lots. And the other thing was, we talked about connectivity, and we talked about just matching the existing what's already there. There's no curb and gutter there, there's no sidewalk there. Widen that road out. Warrior has a mailbox and, brick mailbox and stuff. That's, would be almost in the center of the road then if you're widening out up to that point and then trying to transition back and make it look right. Because more than half of that road, 1,000 feet of it between those two homes is unimproved. And that's all I'm trying to do is match what the existing is. Thought with the sidewalk would be to connect to the other sidewalk on the other side when that portion that Gross owns is developed, because there's actually a sidewalk on that side. There's no sidewalk on the eastern side, anywhere down Sunset. So, that's what's on the table, so if anybody has any questions, just let me know.
Okay. Yeah, are there any questions for Mr. Morris? Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for
Yeah.
presenting. I'll also go ahead and, before we have the first reading, I'll go ahead and add a little bit just from Planning Commission discussions, and Mr. Bicknell, feel free to jump in here. And Mr. Volpe, you're a member of Planning Commission as well. I misspeak, feel free to correct. Same with you, Ms. Duffy. Don't want to leave you out. Initially, this did begin in November of 2017. On December 7th of 2017, Mr. Morris was looking for a vote. Mr. Licklider was presiding over Planning Commission that evening. There was no motion made on any of the variances, and Mr. Morris did indicate that during his presentation moments ago. He did bring it back to Planning Commission. The only way it could come back to Planning Commission was with a change. He did bring it back with the plan that Associate Construction would install and run the water lines from Central Avenue to the lots at Sunset Estates. At that point in time, a motion was made to allow the variance for a sidewalk, as I mentioned earlier during the public forum. That did pass by a vote of 5-1. The recommendation to council regarding this curbs and gutters came to council by a 4-2 vote, and the street widening to maintain the present width was also a 4-2 vote. Just to give information regarding the code, the circumstance that they used that was other than monetary when making the motions was the lack of connectivity to the south. I felt as though my vote, and I'll bring this up on the third reading when we vote on this, there is connectivity to the north side around the corner, which that lot will be platted. Is that correct? The corner lot of Sunset and 123, but it will not be a part of your development. Is that correct? In the street widening, due to the unusual circumstance, I think that language, unusual circumstance, is pretty strong in that code, and is an item to consider for council as we move forward on the next reading.
If I may just,
Go
to
ahead.
add to it, just more for the public's consideration of the process. The code that we refer to as the Carlisle Codified Ordinances that we call the code. The code does provide for the role of Planning Commission. The role of Planning Commission, as defined by the rule, is they are in charge of interpreting and enforcing the rules of certain chapters of the code, one being subdivision regulations, which this was presented under. In subdivision regulations, the code has certain parameters put into place regarding sidewalks, regarding curbs and gutters, regarding the street width, regarding public water. So as Planning Commission went through the process and reading the code, they interpreted the language of the code to determine if this was something they would consider waiving or not. In the code, the reason why this particular issue is before council, the way the code is written, curbs and gutters is an item that Planning Commission did not have the authority to waive independently. The other provisions of the code, sidewalks, public water, and street width is within Planning Commission's purview based on how the code is written. There is certain exceptions they can grant, and based on conversation, they interpreted the code to believe that the exceptions were in place, in their opinion. So that's why they made the motion. But the reason why not everything with this development is before council is by the way the code is written. Only curbs and gutters is specifically not allowed by Planning Commission to be voted on for this particular zoned area. And I believe Planning Commission with the issue of street widening, that is within their legal purview based on the way the code is written. Planning Commission, based on the engineer's recommendation, recognized that the width of the street and curbs and gutters do work together. So when they did pass the exception by, I believe, a 4-2 vote to allow the street not to be widened, there was a caveat tied to it that it would be valid, I can't speak, the waiver would be in place under these, if council did waive curbs and gutters. So the two are now tied together, even though widening is under Planning Commission's purview. So just to kind of understand what Planning Commission's role was and why council's only looking at one particular piece at this point.
You also explained.
Can you come up to the podium, Mr. Volpe?
Thank you. Tom Volpe, 315 Ethel Road. Could you please also explain how this only applies to the east side of the road, not the west side of Sunset? Because that was a discussion as well for sidewalks and gutters and things.
You mean the waiver itself?
This that you're going to have 3 readings and vote on is for Mr. Morris's development on the east side of the road. Does not impact any future development on the west side of Sunset, correct?
This is specifically about these 5 lots under consideration in their improvements.
Should that cornfield ever get developed on the west side of Sunset, it's another discussion for the Planning Commission, correct?
Correct.
And at that time, the Planning Commission could decide to put in sidewalks, because there's continuity and gutters and all of that.
Correct. It would be under the discretion of Planning Commission to review the plans as submitted and make an interpretation of the code.
So let me, if I can ask one more question, and I won't say anything else. So I'm Jim Gross, and I want to develop the west side. He doesn't have to pay for his east side. Why do I have to pay for mine?
I don't think any of us are qualified to speak on that.
I mean,
I mean, that would be Mr. Gross's,
Or
that'd be whoever,
whoever.
that would be whoever developed the land, that would be their decision to come to Planning Commission at that point in time.
But you are correct. I mean, Planning Commission, at the time, it would be developed, it would be up to those members of the board to not only interpret what the code is at that time, and in their opinion, do certain circumstances, are occurring in this planned development by Mr. Gross or whoever the property owner is. They would have to decide, is the plan being presented, do they believe that, how are they interpreting the code to fit the plan? And so there are a lot of factors that would come into play, in my opinion, based on it. So I don't know if a blanket answer, is applicable. But you do raise a point that, which Planning Commission did discuss, that the decision of Planning Commission on these 5 lots, any future developers could look at and say, me too. But it always goes back down to what is specifically being discussed. What does the code say at the time, and how is the code being interpreted by the members of Planning Commission at that time?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Harrover, would you
Did you ever read this?
go ahead with the
Yeah.
first?
We did
Did we
the
do it?
first one.
Okay.
I do have one, the subdivision will be attached to sewer system.
Yes,
The 5
That was-
homes will be attached to the sewer.
yes, he's extending the sewer line. That was never an issue on the table.
We did have the first reading. The second reading will,
Yeah, I don't know, I don't even know if one of you could answer this. The last time this was discussed, it was brought up, the planning commission had rejected the proposal, and they brought it back. And then I see they were asking council to grant a variance. That was a recommendation, to grant a variance based on exceptions to the code, but the reasoning behind that hasn't been presented to council. So even if I was for or against, the issue, I don't have enough information to vote. I would have had to vote no tonight just because I don't have enough information. Can we? It doesn't have to be tonight, since we have 2 more readings. Can we get the recommendation of planning commission of why they want us to consider a variance? That's planning commission's opinion of why, not, we're voting our opinion, right? If we had to vote. Why was it recommended to us to grant variances based on the way the code is written? That's my question.
The section, the section, again, me and my wonderful reading of the code. The section of the code that addresses variances, which is what was used to bring this to council, is section 1222.04 of the code. And I won't bore you with all the legal language. It does say that, I guess I am going to bore you. When a subdivider can show that a provision of the regs, a provision being this curb and gutter, would cause, and this is a direct quote, unnecessary hardship if strictly adhered to, and when, in the opinion of the Planning Commission, because of topographical or other conditions peculiar to the site, a departure may be made without destroying the intent of such provision. The Commission may recommend a variance or modification to council. And to do that, the subdivider shall apply in writing to the Commission stating the reason on which the departure is justified. Any variance and modification authorized by council shall be made by resolution, and a copy thereof shall be attached to and made a part of the final plat. So that's why it's here tonight as a resolution, because of the code. So going back to the language, is the opinion of the Planning Commission, because of topographical, and I'll just say, and members please speak, that was not the issue on the table, is topographical. There's no big boulders or nothing, that was not the issue on the table. There's no topographical issues with this particular property. The discussion with Planning Commission was the other sentence, other conditions peculiar to the site. So in Planning Commission discussion, they interpreted that, and again, Commission to be an issue of conformity and connectivity of the properties also on the eastern side. That is what they discussed and decided would be, in their opinion, why they would recommend that a departure from the regs be made. And so, if I misspoke, please.
No.
No, that's what it is, and, I mean, I can say the same as Mr. McEldowney, my vote for this was no on that. But as far as the explanation, that's the voters of the planning commission on the board, the ones that did vote for it, the stuff you read was exactly the reason why they voted for it.
Yeah, that's correct.
What you're reading.
That's correct, and, I believe, I can't speak for the individuals who voted yes on those, but there was discussion that the connectivity existed on the western side of the street of Sunset versus the east where these are being proposed.
Okay, thank you.
If I may again, you can't see Google Map, but I'd be happy to pass this around.
Been through 33 years, isn't it?
Okay. If you look at Sunset, and I've got no interest with Mr. Morris, we just happen to be neighbors. But Sunset runs parallel, the edges of Sunset, from way back here, where that older home, the nice one on the east side, and across the railroad tracks by the Boyer property, I believe it's called, and then up, it just goes straight up. So having it come up, past the Boyer property, and then go like this, on one side of the road only, made no sense to some of us. I didn't get it. There's no sidewalk on that side. But, as we've said, should anyone decide to develop the other side, it'll come back to planning council. And my 2 cents at that point would be, there's already sidewalk on the west side and gutters, make it look the same. So that's where we were coming from. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, the existing road width, without measuring, our engineers said was about 22 feet. 22 inches would be very small. 22 feet. The dimensions, the width of the code for that street is 28 feet. Street width is measured from back to curb to back to curb. So if curbs and gutters would install, that would count towards the width. Since the developer is only developing on one side, they are not responsible for the entire street width. Is from center line to their side. So they wouldn't be responsible for 28 feet, it would be 14 feet from center. So currently if it's 22, they're at 11 feet. They would need to have another 3. Our engineer stated at the planning commission meetings, I forget how many inches our curb and gutters are, maybe, I think 22, I don't know if you remember Mr. Volpe. But that would, curbs and gutters would take up some of that street width as well. But if it is currently 11 feet from center line, curbs and gutters and street width would add another 3 feet. That's how far it is.
I felt like if they're asking us to approve something that they can't do, I wanted to know why. And that wasn't communicated. Other
So
than,
basically what she's saying is on that side of the road, it would get 5 feet wider until you get to Boyer's property. Then it's gonna go back to the old road it is.
right, no, I get all
That don't
the,
make sense to me.
no, I get all the improvements and the variances, I just didn't, there was no,
There was
Hey,
no
as a
explanation
planning
of
commission,
why
it
they
wasn't-
changed their,
we want to change it, here's why. That's my only question. Thank you.
Any other discussion items? Okay. Second reading will take place on February 27th. And for your records, Mr. Morris, it appears the final reading will be March 13th, if I'm looking at that correctly. Ordinance 1-18 is being presented to council for consideration as an emergency. Is there any discussion? Ms. Duffy, can you provide the emergency?
Yes, we haven't read the title yet. This ordinance is an ordinance requesting to extend the moratorium that had been in place, passed by council 6 months ago, I think it was, or back in August, whenever that was, how many months ago that was, for putting a moratorium in place on granting any permits for dispensaries, cultivation, or processing of medical marijuana. The 180 days of the previous moratorium has expired this past weekend, so this being put on an emergency to put the moratorium immediately back into place to protect the health, wealth, and safety of the community against such permits possibly being issued, so that way council has time to decide this particular issue and what they would like to do from a more permanent basis. So if it were not passed as an emergency into 3 readings in 30 days, this would be permitted, potentially, types of industries that could come into the community and seek.
And there is no change to the existing moratorium?
Yes. This resolution or ordinance, sorry, that's presented in front of you is word for word what was passed back in August. It does include the provision that it is not the current land agreement that the village is still under with the business park land for the cultivation site. That is still carved out as an exception where that cultivation is still allowed because that still is technically on the table. Our law director is working with their legal counsel to discuss if that contract is now at the end of its cycle. There is a provision already built into the contract where they can exercise an option to extend it further. We're trying to get clarification if they are planning to use that option agreement currently in the contract or if they are done. So that's why we need to keep that small piece of cultivation carved out. But it is word for word from the previous ordinance that just expired.
May I have a motion to suspend the rule requiring 3 readings, have 1 reading by title only, and declaring an emergency?
so moved.
Is there a
Second.
second?
Mr. McIntosh?
Yes.
Ms. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. McElDowney?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mr. Bignell?
Yes.
Mr. Humphries?
Yes.
An ordinance extending a moratorium for a period of 180 days on the granting of any permit allowing retail dispensaries, cultivators, or any processors of medical marijuana within the municipality of Carlisle, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Is there any further discussion by council? Hearing none, may I have a motion to adopt the ordinance?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Humphries?
Yes.
Mr. Bignell?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Ms. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. McElDowney?
Yes. We do have first reading of ordinance 2-18 this evening.
An ordinance providing the issuance of $1 million renewal bond anticipation notes for the purpose of paying a portion of the cost of making road improvements in the municipality.
Any discussion by council?
This is our annual buy down of the debt that the municipality incurred for the extension of Union Road and improvements to Fairview Drive at that intersection. This represents a $325,000 buy down. In my manager's memo, I said 320. It was 325 from the previous issuance, which is on schedule for the buy down when we originally proposed the debt. It is paid for out of funds from the Timber Ridge, which was built into the caveat of those funds as where the money should go to. The Timber Ridge TIF is still performing well and can substantiate this debt, and we're on track to pay it off.
Any discussion? Okay. Second reading will be on for February 27th. Ordinance 3-18 is also on for a first reading this evening.
An ordinance providing for the issuance of $745,000 of bond anticipation notes by the municipality of Carlisle, Ohio, to provide funds to renew bond anticipation notes originally issued for the purpose of making road improvements in the municipality.
This is another annual debt buy down of existing debt. This debt was incurred when we did State Route 123 improvements of phases 4 through 7, which, if I recall, was basically from Jamaica Road westward. The widening, center curbs and gutters and sidewalks. This debt is serviced from the Eagle Ridge TIF funds, represents a buy down of $95,000, which is still keeping it on track to be bought down on schedule. I failed to say both the previous ordinance, the Timber Ridge TIF debt and the Eagle Ridge TIF debt, both of those payments were part of the 2018 budget appropriation. So it is already built into the budget, and we're on schedule.
Any discussion regarding ordinance 3-18? Hearing none, that will be on for a second reading on February 27th.
Before we adjourn, I don't know if, I apologize,
Okay.
with Mr. Humphrey's update about Mrs. Sweezy, at some point, it doesn't have to be tonight, just to clean up, we will need a motion by council to officially remove her from the board that she currently is applied to, since she's no longer eligible to serve, since she no longer resides in Carlisle. It's not a matter of urgency, that board is not scheduled to meet. I think it's Property Maintenance Review Board, if I'm correct. It just did
Believe so.
not,
Do we
to
want
keep it on.
to confirm, and we can handle that at the next meeting,
Okay.
if that's okay with everyone? We have no second or third readings tonight. We do not have an executive session. Following this meeting, we do have a work session to continue discussions on sections of the Carlisle zoning code, including parking of recreational personal vehicles on residential and commercial property. The public is welcome to attend the work session this evening, but that is all that we have on for the regular agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Pardon.
Second.
Mr. Jewett? Sorry.
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Yes.
Ms. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Bignell?
Yes.
Mr. Humphries?
Yes.
Mr. McElDowney?
Yes. We are adjourned.
Pick on me right off the first one.